Well, good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, up and at 'em, ready to begin a new week. And we are continuing our series on the formation of the deep state. And I think we've covered how it was formed. And of course, it wasn't formed as a deep state. It was never the intention. And I think that's important for people to understand. There was never any conscious choice by anyone in America or American politics or our society at large to form a deep state that would be unaccountable and unelected and act as a shadow government behind the scenes, affecting foreign policy, controlling politicians, controlling even domestic policy. That was never the intent. What happened was, it sort of just it was like almost like an organic thing that happened after the Civil War, the rise of corporations. And then to aid and assist in the rise of corporations, the Ultra Vires Act gave the marching orders or the mandate to these corporatists, some people call them robber barons, to maximize profits. That was their only agenda, and to not worry about public interest, but to free themselves up just to worry about profits. And the corporations got big and huge. And of course, then included in that Ultra Vires Act was the immunization of all personnel within the corporation, but also the immunization of the corporation itself from having to pay taxes. So they divided up all their income and hid it among holding companies or shell companies. IRS couldn't find it. Also to hide their assets in case of civil litigation. And they could spread those out amongst uh, subsidiaries. And so all the rules were written to help these corporations become monsters. And that's what they did. And then once they realized that they had this runway that was just cleared for them to make money and not worry about public interest and not worry about any sort of liability, they started casting their eyes abroad, saying we need, in order for example, the sugar industry, we need overseas territories where the climate is right, sugar cane grows, so that uh, yields us the territory of Hawaii, which we stole from the Hawaiians, and that immersed us in a plot to get involved in a war with Spain so we could get Cuba. And then we were also looking for resources in other places, so we bought whole Alaska from the Russians. We got all the colonies from Spain after the Spanish-American War. And what we realized was uh, these corporatists realized that they had some serious power. They were supporting all these presidential candidates, these congressional candidates, senators, local politicians. They held the purse strings, which means they held a lot of power, even with judges. And so they began crafting new ideas to get involved in new foreign conflicts or new foreign territories for the purposes of creating our own empire. So all of these resources and all of these markets would be in-house. We wouldn't have to depend on foreign governments or foreign markets. We could basically control all of these. That's if you remember the causes of imperialism, the desire to create an empire was to create a, a market for your overseas goods, also to get access to raw materials, to gain access to territories once we used up all our Western territory, also for military bases, which was going to be uh, necessary to control and maintain, even expand our empire, and then also for the purposes of social Darwinism. We're in a competitive struggle with all these other imperialist nations, and if we don't expand, they will, and soon we'll be a target. So the ball is rolling downhill. It all started with the desire to make money, and now it's morphed into a desire to create an empire, but it all goes back to the same root cause, to make money. And that's how we got involved in the Spanish-American War. That's why we fought the Filipino insurrection, to hold on to something we had achieved as a result of the Spanish-American War. That's why we got involved in Haiti and Mexico under Wilson, and eventually that's why we got involved in World War I. And in the last chapter, we learned, it was chapter 11, we learned that uh, how this doctrine of ultra vires, as long as it stayed in the private sector, there was at least uh, an argument that the government was on the people's side, and they would always act as a counterbalance to these big corporatists, these robber barons, these captains of industry, this rapidly forming deep state. And the government would represent the people because that's all they care about is public interest, or at least that's the theory. What we learned in chapter 11 was because of a crisis, World War I, Woodrow Wilson invites these best and brightest guys, these corporatists, these guys that own these companies or these industries. He invites them into the government to help fight the war, to help run the war effort. So with matters, Bernard Baruch comes in, runs the entire U.S. economy by himself. So instead of 50 or 60 men running the economy, now it's one. And then we bring in Herbert Hoover to run the food allocation program. And then we bring in George Creel to handle all the public information, to make official the use of propaganda against the American people, to sell the war, to sell war bonds, to keep support high for the war, et cetera, et cetera. And so here we have the ultimate irony is that during the time of our greatest expansion as far as overseas empire, we are governed by three, what most people consider to be progressive presidents, or uh, presidents who are operating uh, on the opposite side of the spectrum of these power elites. They are the check and balance against these power elites. At least that's the theory. But yet, when it comes to foreign policy, uh, you know, no one was more outward thinking than Teddy Roosevelt. He's the one who dug the canal, right? Uh, ginned up a fake controversy with Colombia to basically force the Panama to sell that area, that land, the rights to that land to us, so we could dig that canal. So now a one ocean navy could get back and forth between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And the argument was, well, that's necessary for national security. But really what it was about was trade with the Far East. We needed not only to be able to trade with the Far East, it established a huge shortcut for ships leaving New York, for example, the East Coast, sail down. Instead of going all the way around the southern tip of South America, they could go right to the Panama, out to the Pacific, to the Far East. Not only for those purposes, trade back and forth, but also to be able to protect, control that sphere of influence that we had in the Far East. Our Navy had to be uh, within striking distance, just in case any competitor got an idea that they could come in and snoop around in our sphere of influence. So it was Teddy who really started this ball rolling. He's the one that sailed the goodwill tour around Japan to threaten Japan and intimidate Japan to leave China alone. China was now our big project, and Japan had been a problem for China for years. So again, Teddy intervened, and and then you get to Taft, and he used money. We learned about that to buy the alliances of foreign territories. He was sort of our sugar daddy president. And then you get to Woodrow Wilson, who claimed in his campaign he would never stoop to those depths again. He would never use the military or use money to be a bully on the world stage. And yet, as soon as he becomes president, he has basically shown the facts of life, and he intervenes three times, once in Haiti, another time in Mexico, and then ultimately in World War One. So, three progressive presidents uh, who claim to be at odds with all the things that the power elites are for, in the end, uh, at least from an imperialism standpoint, support and participate in the spread of the American empire around the world. Now, here at home, they did some things that the progressive movement hailed. Teddy busted up some trusts, these companies that got so big to hide how big they were and how powerful they were. They divided themselves up into trusts, or they handed off control of the company to a trust or trustees. And that was supposed to hide the fact that it was the same owner who really controlled all these companies. He figured it out. He was known as the trust buster. Progressive legislation that continued to a degree under Taft, not as much as Teddy liked, which is why the Republican Party split eventually. But and then Woodrow Wilson came in, and a lot of progressive legislation here at home happened while he was president. But the empire building was continuing abroad. And I told you in chapter 11 that one of the main impetuses behind America, the power elites wanting an excuse to get involved in World War I, was so that we would be at the peace table where all the goodies are distributed, where the maps are redrawn, uh, where the post-World War I world would be created. And if we're not there representing and or protecting our own interests are at risk. They're jeopardized. The only way we're involved in this process is if we're involved in the war somehow. So we accomplished that, and we talked about how Britain uh, and I believe the American government worked together, colluded together to run a Spanish-American war scam on the American people. If you remember, to get involved in the Spanish-American War, our government used the yellow press to propagandize the American people and cast the Spaniards as the bad guy and us as the good guys. And then that same press was used to propagandize the American people with manufactured evidence, that letter from the Spanish ambassador, which was never produced, it was just reported on. And then ultimately, our government acted out a false flag attack in Havana Harbor and blamed Spain for it. And by that point, the American people, the pump had been primed, and the American people were ready for their first foreign war. Well, fast forward to World War I, and Britain, more so than any other ally, has a huge motive for America, wanting America to join the war, especially when word reaches the Allies that the Russians are going to drop out of the war. There's a very distinct possibility the Allies are going to lose unless somebody else, a first round draft choice, so to speak, like the United States, joins the war at the same time the Russians drop out. So, Britain cut the transatlantic cables, so all the information from Europe would come through Britain to the Americans. It was filtered through their filter. It was straight propaganda coming to the United States. We were learning about all the German uh, failures when it comes to international law, but we didn't know anything about what Britain was doing with regards to international law. We just heard about the Germans, and that's exactly how the British wanted it. Secondly, the British, because they controlled all the information that's coming to America, were able to, again, report on a note from the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmerman, to Mexico. And that was printed, given to the American people. Of course, the American people sopped it up, and it angered, just like the alleged letter from the Spanish ambassador calling McKinley a weak and stupid politician. It catered to the jingoistic spirit of American people. The Zimmerman note catered to the patriotic spirit of the American people, saying, hey, the Germans are trying to lure us into a war by enticing our neighbor to join them so that they can get some of their territory back. And it just infuriated the American population. Of course, again, that telegram was never produced. It was just reported on. A lot of people believe both sides on that. So it hasn't been proven conclusively either way, but it sure does fit the pattern, doesn't it? And then thirdly, they sent their ship, flying under a neutral country's flag, our flag, into harm's way intentionally, fully loaded with American citizens, knowing it would be sunk. And when it was, the American people, it was the equivalent of a false flag. I believe, I can't prove it, I believe the American government was fully aware of what Britain was doing and was complicit in it by giving them permission to do this, because whether we are carrying out these efforts to get us into the war or our best ally is, doesn't matter. The result is the same. And the outcome, the motives are the same. We wanted to be in the war so we could be at the peace table. Britain wanted us to be in the war to help them win. There was a danger of them losing. We definitely wanted the Allied side to win. We knew we could make the ultimate difference. And as the war dragged on and on and on, we thought, this could be like Spanish-American War #2. A splendid little war for us. It's terrible for the Europeans, but let them do all the heavy lifting, do all the dying, and we'll come in at the end, make the difference. We'll lose a few soldiers, but nothing compared to them, and we'll be on the winning side. It's a win-win for us. So I believe this is the second time treason has been what's the word I'm looking for? Treason has replaced treachery. For a long time, these power elites were very treacherous in their actions towards the American people because they weren't required to care about the public interest. But during the Spanish-American War, it crossed into treason when they propagandized and lied to the American people, betraying them into a war that the American people probably wouldn't have supported if they'd been privy to the truth. And here we are in World War II, treason again, a European war that our founding fathers always warned us against, that we probably wouldn't have supported entry into if we'd been privy to the truth. But we weren't. So that is treason. So when American citizens die, that's treason. So we finished up talking about the end of the war and the casualty count. Of course, the casualties were extremely high, again, for the Europeans, not for the Americans. And but the war is over, we're on the winning side. So all of the objectives have been met. England and the Allies wanted to win. And when Russia dropped out, they were in danger of losing. But by luring the Americans into the war, it enabled them to win. So their objective was met. Our objective was to get into the war at the end so we could be at the peace table. And Woodrow Wilson was at his core an internationalist. He was not an isolationist. Isolationists back home in America says we don't want to get in a war for any reason. It's not our war, and he wasn't on the other side either. So that we should go to war. It is our business. But he was an internationalist. An internationalist is sort of a blend of the two. Says we don't want to get involved in the war if we don't have to, at least the fighting and the dying part. But we definitely want to be involved in the peace process afterwards. And so these internationalists make decisions. It's like, well, what is it going to take to get us at that peace table? And when Russia dropped out, up until Russia drops out, we could trade secretly with the Allies and help support their cause. But when Russia dropped out, now the Allies needed a fresh infusion of soldiers. It's one thing Russia provides, lots and lots, a huge land army. And it was occupying the Germans and the other side was forced, the Central Power was forced to fight a two-front war. As soon as the Russians dropped out, they didn't have to fight that two-front war. Now they could concentrate all their energies on England, for example, and France, the West. So I'm telling you, they were at very great risk of losing. So America jumping in at the same time Russia dropped out was necessary. The secret ally isn't going to be sufficient anymore. You need to be an ally that sends troops. And indeed, America did send a lot of troops quickly. So we made the difference and we win the war. So now our objective has been met. And now our president has a chance to carry out his progressive dream for the world. And this is where we're going to see today the limits to presidential power, the limits to this progressivism that Woodrow Wilson is going to try to impose upon the rest of the world. He's going to find out there's a lot of resistance to it, not just on the international stage, but back here at home as well. It's like during the lead up to the war and during the war, Woodrow Wilson was getting progressive legislation passed back here at home. But as long as he pursued, or at least permitted, these power elites' agenda to go forward, which was to gradually get sucked into World War I, involve ourselves in that war to protect our interests around the world. As long as he uh, allowed imperialism to continue, and in fact, even contributed to it, they gave him some wins on the legislative front back here at home, progressive wins. But now that the war is over and now it's time to protect our interest on the world stage, you're going to see two competing worldviews clash. You're going to see Wilson's progressive worldview clash with these power elites and with other imperialist nations around the world as they soundly reject all of his proposals and send him back to America with his tail between his legs. And then when he campaigns in America for the one bone that they did give him from his 14 points, the American people and Congress firmly rejected him on that, just that one point. So that his grand plan, which was to get these 14 points included in the peace treaty, which would create this progressive utopia, he thought, around the world, not a single one of these points was actually adopted here at the United States, at the United States level anyway. One of them was adopted in Europe, but we'll get to that. So he went to Europe, and he thought he was destined, like this cartoon shows, to be the conductor of this great orchestra. And all of these folks, these other nations and the world leaders would listen and respond to his leadership. He would be the leader of the band, so to speak. And I've listed 7 of the points. You could go through all 14. That's really not the point of this episode. I just want to illustrate how the power elites put the handcuffs on Woodrow Wilson. Some of these are pretty good ideas. You know, he understands that, just like we talked about, one of the reasons a local conflict became a world war is because found out too late that all these countries had secret alliances. And it'd be nice if all the alliances would be above board, so everyone would be aware of who was allied with whom. So no secret alliances. I think that's a pretty good idea, right? Freedom of the seas. One of the reasons why the war spiraled out of control was because the British used their navy to blockade German ports, right? And then the Germans used their subs to sink all the Allied ships, especially after they realized the British especially were cheating and using neutral flags and hiding armaments and contraband and passenger ships, etc. So there was no freedom on the seas. And the Lusitanian argument could be made as the reason America got into the war. If the Lusitania hadn't gone down, maybe America doesn't join the war. So freedom of the seas, another good idea. 3, free trade. And of course, this was something that if you're an imperialist nation, we like to use the word free trade, but really what you want is trade that favors you. So you create an empire and you trade with that empire. You know, remember, the second goal of imperialism is to create export markets. So you're trading with these foreign territories, but you hold all the cards. They don't hold the cards. You hold all the whole. Otherwise, you would have traded with them before you made them into a colony, and let them set their terms of their own nation's trade policy. But instead, now you're in control because they're in your empire, they're in your sphere of influence. And so you write the rules to favor yourself. In other words, this is an attack on imperialism itself. And he didn't make any bones about it. His number 4 goal was to end imperialism as we know it. That's a That's going to be a big ask when you're going over and you're negotiating with Britain, who has the largest empire in the world, when you're negotiating with France, which has an extremely far-flung empire, when you're the United States and you yourself have an empire, it's going to be a big ask. Uh, Arms reductions, we talked about the rise of the militaries to basically to protect our imperialist empires. And eventually those militaries butt heads with one another. And of course, the technology has changed. It's rapidly developing these new weapons that are weapons of mass destruction. And they can reach further, create more havoc, cause more damage, kill more people. So he's into arms limitations. Ironically, a lot of this is very similar to some of the stuff JFK is going to argue for in the 60s. A month before he died, he signed the nuclear arms limitation agreement with Khrushchev, where they would agree to ban above ground testing of future nuclear weapons. And that was a predicate, what he really wanted, which was complete nuclear freeze in his second term. He was going to try to negotiate a freeze or the end of nuclear weaponry going forward into a second term. He was into it. I could go on and on about his outreach to Latin America, the Peace Corps, etc. He was arguing for some of the exact same things, and they killed him for that. So in a way, Woodrow Wilson's going to come off a little light on this, but right to self-determination flies in the face of imperialism. Imperialism is when a stronger country comes in and takes over a weaker one and takes away the right to self-determination. So you see what Wilson is doing. He's striking and he's targeting the heart of imperialism with these 14 points. And then he wanted to create a League of Nations whereby people could come together and talk out their differences rather than fight them out. It was his opinion that the reason this war spiraled out of control the way it did is because people weren't talking. And actions were followed by reactions, which were followed by reaction to the reaction. And it's just before you know it, everybody's at war. So some of these are very good points, but you can see he's got his work cut out for him because I don't think here at home even, at least the power elites who pulled his strings and made him send in the military to Haiti, to Mexico, eventually World War I, they're not going to support this. But they're going to allow him to go off under the charade or under the I guess the naive understanding that he's going to be able to lead these other empire building countries to his desired goal, or lead them to the destiny that he wants for the world. And then he'll come home, present this treaty to the United States Senate, arguing that, hey, the whole world supports this. You need to jump on board. And they're going to let these foreign countries do the work for them because I think they understand better than he does where they stand on all these issues. Another argument that Wilson wanted to counteract was this idea of punishing Germany. He felt that if you try to punish Germany too much for being on the losing side of being the cause of the war, or being, responsible for the war, it's going to cause first of all, it's going to crash the German economy, and then the bitterness that comes out of that could lead to a future war. He was a little bit prophetic when it comes to this. The British and the French don't care. They don't care. They're saying, hey, Woodrow Wilson, you live over there. You're safe relatively because you've got an Atlantic Ocean that separates you from Germany. You've got a Pacific Ocean that protects your backside. And you have that luxury to come over here and say, hey, just forgive Germany for what they did. Forgive Austria-Hungary. Forgive the Ottoman Empire. We have to go back to being their neighbors. And they have a history of being aggressive people, an aggressive nation state. And furthermore, World War I caused us a lot more damage than it did you. None of your cities were burned. None of your, very few of your soldiers died. Millions of our soldiers and our civilian population, millions died. So don't come over here telling us how we should treat Germany after the war. Don't come over here preaching your forgiveness and reconciliation. We want payback. We want reparations. We want, for all the war damages, we want Germany to pay. And it's what they call reparations. And they said, just like any good war, the winning side sets the terms, the losing side accepts the terms. And we want all of their colonial holdings, we want their military disbanded, and we want their money. And on top of that, we want them to sign a clause stipulating that they are the reason the war happened, a war guilt clause. They are responsible for the war. Now, how do you set reparations? How do you fix a dollar amount? They basically came up with this figure. It's been estimated at $55 billion. Now, back, $55 billion doesn't sound like it's a lot of money, even today. Back then, it was an impossible amount of money. And what they basically told Wilson was, you go sit in the corner, we'll handle this part of the negotiation. When we're done, you can come back and join the rest of us. But this is going to happen. And Wilson got outvoted. And they told Germany, you start paying, and we're not even going to tell you how much you owe. The number's too big. We'll tell you when you're done paying, when you've paid enough. But you're going to pay reparations for the war damages. This was part of the Treaty of Versailles that was negotiated after World War I. Of course, Wilson is just appalled. This goes against everything. He says this is just going to lead to a future war, which he was right. It led to the rise of Hitler when the German people were just absolutely flat on their back, humiliated after losing. Now they've lost their military. Now they've lost their colonies. Their wealth is gone. The inflation is so bad, you could back a dump truck after the war. You could back a dump truck full of German marks. I think they were marks, the German equivalent of the dollar. You could back them up to a grocery store, dump them in the grocery store, and it would be enough to buy you maybe one loaf of bread. The inflation was so bad. So they began reaching out, struggling, looking for anyone who might have a solution to their problems. Along comes a madman who promises to fix everything. And voila, World War II. But so he gets railroaded, Wilson does, into signing a treaty that forces reparations upon Germany. They have to give up their colonies, they have to eliminate their military, and have to sign the war guilt clause. So where Wilson was advocating peace without victory, which means we're not going to go rub their nose in it. We're going to accomplish peace through this treaty process, but we're not going to make Germany feel worse than it already feels. The British and the French are saying, no, we want peace and victory so that we don't have to worry about this happening again. Ironically, their approach led directly to World War II. Wilson, they should have listened to Wilson because you can't prove that it wouldn't have happened in World War II, but you know what happened when they took the opposite approach. So I don't know if it could have been worse, but anyway, and so we end up with this Treaty of Versailles, where Britain, Italy, and France, the leadership from these countries. Remember, Italy originally started on the Central Power side. Once they put their finger in the wind, realized, oh, we're going to lose, they switched sides so that, for the same reason we wanted to be at the peace table, so did they. So Britain, Italy, and France outvoted Wilson. And all his 14 points got whittled away one after another. I mean, can you imagine Wilson trying to argue to Britain, we need to end imperialism? There's just no way. And freedom of the seas, that's been Britain's ticket to dominance, world dominance forever. to dominate the seas. They're not going to go for that. Free trade, imperialism, and free trade are not that they're opposites. They don't even agree with one another. The whole purpose of imperialism is so that you can open up new trade markets that you control. They're not going to go for any of this. And of course, they didn't go for the idea of forgiving Germany either. The only one they gave him was his last bullet point item, which was the League of Nations. And I thought, oh, well, it wouldn't be bad. More talk certainly can't hurt. We'll put together a world organization where we can send ambassadors and people can talk out the problem. It doesn't solve any, it doesn't, it's not binding in any way or shape, form. Can't hurt. We'll let Wilson feel like he contributed something to this whole process. So in the end, Wilson, who went over there, too much fanfare. He announced it in several speeches back home in America. I'm going over there with these 14 points. And crowds would cheer, yay, Wilson. And everyone, and he had all these grand ambitions. And the power elites who are behind the scenes pulling his chain, got him to violate his campaign promise, send military into Mexico, send military into Haiti, eventually join World War One, are behind the scenes saying, we'll see. We'll see how far he gets with all that over there talking with Britain and France. And whatever he comes home with still has to pass the Senate. And we control the Senate. So let him have his moment and feel like he's done something. This is something I always remember whenever I see presidents, even to this day, taking credit on the international stage for something. I think back to Wilson. I remember, okay, whatever credit he got on an international stage for these 14 points wasn't much because they threw out 13 of them. They did give him one, so he'll get a little bit of credit for the one. But then he'll come home and that one will get thrown out, voted down 3 different times. And so in the end, he in his own country, he got none. So it reminds me that there are people behind the scenes that are more powerful than our president. Everybody says the president's the most powerful man on earth. I just don't believe that's true. I mean, just this weekend, Trump's been talking incessantly about sending the National Guard to Chicago to help with their crime problem. And of course, the Chicago mayor and the governor of Illinois, they have missed an opportunity to give speeches about, how they oppose that. And they're going to fight it with everything they got. They're going to put their people in the streets. On and on it goes. So it's looking like a showdown. Well, in the end, Trump sent the National Guard to Memphis. Why Memphis? Because there's a Republican governor in Tennessee. And more likely get the support of the Republican governor in Tennessee than he's going to get the Democratic governor in Illinois. And there's a very widely acknowledged crime problem in Memphis too. So let's go to a place where I won't have it. So in other words, they rattled their sabers at Trump, and Trump, who most people think is one of the strongest presidents we've ever had, even he changed his mind. So, okay, we'll go to Memphis instead. And Louisiana. He's going to send down to New Orleans. These are 2 Republican states. Now, I'm sure that he has motives to shame the Democrats, right? When he when he solves the crime problem in Memphis and he solves the crime problem in New Orleans, and he's already used the National Guard to solve the crime problem in Washington, D.C. Now he has something to take into the midterm elections and use as a blunt instrument politically against the Democrat Party in the midterms. And it will be an effective message because even the people of LA and Chicago and these crime-ridden cities, that are democratically controlled, they want the crime problem fixed. And their guys don't ever fix it. So it'll be a very effective leverage instrument then, but it's a more nuanced play than you expect out of Trump. You expect him to go in there with a blunt instrument, knock people over the head, and cause chaos. He didn't do that. And the reason he didn't do it is because he's running into opposition. And so to say that the president is the most powerful man on earth, he can't even get governors of Democrat states to go along with his ideas, to accept his offer of help, to submit. So how, and you see the frustration that he's having right now trying to get Zelensky and Putin to agree to end the Ukraine war. You see the frustration of trying to get world leaders like Netanyahu and whoever's representing Palestine right to end that war over in the Middle East. It's not easy. You might be the most powerful man on earth, but there's no guarantee these world leaders are ever going to listen to you. There's no guarantee even governors of one of 50 states in the United States is going to listen to you. You're not as powerful as you think. And Woodrow Wilson is finding this out. He's going over into the belly of the beast, into Europe where this war started. And these European leaders are laughing him out of the conference. We'll give him one. We'll give him the League of Nations. I can just hear him behind the scenes. Like, give him that stupid League of Nations, make him feel like, I can just hear Britain. This is our best ally. This is the country that helped us win this war. We need to give them some bone, make them feel like their contribution was worthwhile. It's totally a patronizing move. So back home in America, you have with respect to this treaty that was signed, the Treaty of Versailles, when it has to be ratified, the Senate, according to the Constitution, all treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. And the Senate is basically split into two groups of people. You have the irreconcilables. These are the isolationist senators who are saying, no, we're not signing any treaty that this opposes this treaty includes a League of Nations that the way it's written is it's like another alliance. And all those who sign on to this treaty are now part of this. There's this article in the treaty, Article 10, this mutual defense agreement whereby an attack on one is considered an attack on all. That's how we got ourselves into this war to begin with. All these alliances. Now, the difference here is the alliances are above board. Everybody knows who they are. But they're like, no, we oppose Article 10. We're not going to be part of any mutual defense agreement. This is before NATO, by the way. And so they're going to vote. They're a hard no. Then you have the reservationists. They want to change something. They're opposed to the treaty the way it's written, and they want to make their own changes to it. This is the fingerprints of the power elites. Remember, they said, we'll let Wilson go over to Europe. These European nations will whittle down those 14 points down to one or two, and then whatever he brings back, our politicians in our pocket here at home will change those. And in the end, he'll get nothing. So he's facing quite the obstacles here to try to get this treaty passed. So he decides, well, I'm going to go on a tour across the country, and I'm going to give speeches every day from the back of this train car, and I'm going to rally support, which will put public pressure on these politicians, on these senators to vote yes. And it's funny. So knowing what we know, behind the scenes, these unelected, unaccountable power elites that don't want any part of Wilson's 14 points and have been very happy to see Europe whittle it from 14 down to one, now don't want the one. And so they're putting their pressure on these senators whom they own to say no. And then on the other side, Wilson's going around trying to campaign to get the people to put the countervailing pressure against these power elites to pressure the senators to say yes. So for once, you have a test case or a case study of the power of the people versus the power of these power elites, these 50 to 60 guys that run everything. We've already established they run the corporations, which means they run the economy, and because they make all the money, they control Washington, the political scene, because they contribute all the campaign donation. So you have a real uh, clash here between the power elites and the people. Wilson goes and gives 32 speeches in about 33 days, has this massive stroke, almost dies, has to go back to Washington and spend out his days in Washington. Of course, this is the reason we have, I think it's the 25th Amendment now, because no one really knew how sick he was. He basically was convalescing in a bed, and his wife was running the government. She would go to the door, open the door. They would hand through documents. She would close the door. She'd go back, forge his name, return, open the door, hand him up. And no one knew how sick he was. His wife was running the presidency. Ironically, and that interesting, we just came off a Biden presidency where many people are learning the extent to which Biden was incapacitated. And now they're starting to wonder who was running his presidency. This is a very relevant issue. So remember now, he's sick and in bed. He's made his speeches. He's put his best foot forward, but now he's incapacitated. He can't do any more. In November of 1919, the treaty, without any changes, goes before the Senate. It's voted down. Then they tried to make major changes, which would appease the reservationists. It's also voted down. Then they tried to make just a few changes around. It's also voted down a third time, which means in the end, Woodrow Wilson got zero. Actually, he absolutely nothing. When he went to Europe, to all the fanfare with these 14 points, he was determined to lead the world out of the wilderness into the promised land. No more war. This was the war to end all wars. This is going to be the treaty to end all future conflicts. And he got nothing. In the end, all of the objectives going into the war remain the objectives coming out of the war. Imperialism is alive and well. Navy buildups, military buildups is alive and well. Trade that is controlled by the imperialist nations is alive and well. There is no right to self-determination. The strong nation, this is a social Darwinist world. The strong control the weak. The fit control the unfit. And that dynamic will continue going forward. So you make an argument, nothing really got settled by World War I, which is why it sort of is if you look at it in terms of like a game, like a football game, it was the first half. Now we'll have the interwar years, which is like the halftime, and then we'll have the second half of the game in World War II. Because all the same participants, a lot of the same issues are going to be fought over in World War II. And so Wilson's project, the point of today's topic is to show that as a president, you can have all these progressive ideas, which are anti-power elite. These are the ideas that, remember, were the reaction against the rise of the corporation, the robber barons, ultravires. You had these three progressive presidents who were passing all this progressive legislation back home, like, protect, the rise. You've seen the rise of labor unions, women getting the right to vote, anti-child labor laws, all these things as a buffer, as a bulwark against these power elites. But meanwhile, the imperialist on the empire building, from a foreign standpoint, is continuing unabated, which is really what the power elites are focused on. Got to get those resources, got to get those markets, got to get that territory, got to get those military bases, got to beat these other nations in this social Darwinist pursuit of these empires. And though Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, the three progressive presidents, did get a lot of progressive legislation passed here at home, when it comes to that's like the little stuff. The major stuff, which is the empire building, continued unabated. The military interventions. For 100 years, we had no foreign wars, no military interventions on foreign soil. Now, all of a sudden, we've had the Spanish-American War. Well, first of all, we went in with the Marines and took Hawaii. and then we had the Spanish-American War, and then the Filipino insurrection, and then we had Haiti, and then we had Mexico. Now we've had World War I, and now the die is cast. We went in and dug that canal in Panama. We got these spheres of influence. We got empires scattered all around the world, and no progressive president. I mean, if we have to give them, a few progressive, like doggy biscuits here at home, fine. But he's not touching our overseas empire. And when he went over to negotiate with people who taught us about imperialism, with people who taught us how to build empires, and he went over there and tried to lecture them, they laughed him out of the court. They laughed him out of Versailles and took out 13 of his 14 objectives. And when he comes home, the power elites took care of the last one so that he gets nothing. And he dies a broken man. Now, in the long run, he gets some things because the League of Nations, though we never joined, later morphs into the United Nations. And not only do we join that after World War II, we actually put its headquarters in our country, New York City. And he's proven right on some things. But in this moment, the power elites pull rank on him. And just like, I'm not above saying that the collusion that got us into the war between us and Britain did not continue after the war between these same parties, whereby they said, okay, our president is coming over with these 14 points. Now, you do your part to get rid of most of those, and we'll take care of the other, whatever's left. And because let's face it, Britain is an empire that was their identity. They were not going to give in to Wilson's 14 points. And I can't prove that we acted in collusion with them after or even before, but my suspicion is that we did. So anyway, that's so this deep state has been formed, and now it's just continually morphing, and it's new dispensation, or its new identity is as the movers and shakers of this American foreign empire. And it's all about trade and money and markets and resources and all these things. Ultimately, it's all about money. And no president, whether progressive in his campaign or one of their own, is going to change that. And if he threatens to try to change that, they'll do whatever's necessary to prevent that from happening. So you start to see, you see, starting at the end of the Civil War, continuing up to World War I. Now, what we're going to learn going forward is that these power elites are going to do an accounting after World War I and realize, not only did it preserve our empire and our interests abroad, which means our money, it also made us a lot of money during the war. In other words, war is extremely profitable. Wonder if we had this new business model while we're protecting our overseas empires. Continuous warfare could be another way to make another revenue stream that is more profitable than anything we've been doing on the other side. And so you're going to start to see war become an industry after World War I. It become in America for a long time, we were like, our military was like a volunteer fire department. After a war was over, everybody go home, farm. And then here, a war, and then you got to mobilize, you got to get everybody together, and you got all these volunteers, maybe you have to draft some people, whatever. And then you have your war, and then it all goes back to the way it was. Well, after World War I, that's not going to happen anymore. And the need to raise an army, military that is always ready, in a state of readiness, which means you're going to have to be constantly enlisting men, building weapon systems, building bases. It's going to become an industry. And that started sort of start, after the Civil War, we went back to life as usual. And then when the Spanish-American War, it was one of the reasons we were doing so poorly. We were using outdated weapons. We had never fought a foreign war. We didn't know how to supply things. We were trying to train troops on the fly. Uh, and we lucked out. We were fighting an inferior opponent, and we won anyway, in spite of that. And then you have the Mexico and you have the Haiti issues. World War One, all of a sudden we realized, oh, this needs to be, in order going forward, what if this happens again? Even though they're saying this is the war to end all wars, probably it's not going to be, realistically. And we're going to have these empires. They're always going to be clashing. Indigenous peoples always going to rise up. We're going to have to protect our empire, protect our interests. There's going to be more of this. We better have a military that's in a state of readiness, that we are supplying and we are outfitting and we are developing new weapon systems and we're feeding, and all these things require support industries to make happen. And so that's one of the big outcomes of World War One, is war becomes a full-time industry in America. Now, not as much as after World War II, but I want you to start thinking that way, because that's what these power elites are thinking. They're always thinking ahead. War made us a lot of money, and we're going to talk about that, how much money it made them, and which industries profited the most, and why they might think war could be the business model going forward to make us the most money. And it'll kill two birds with one stone. It'll make us a bunch of money preparing for the next war, and it will also, and fighting the next one, and it'll also protect all of our interests abroad as we militarize and get bigger and bigger, and our military budgets get bigger and bigger, and our military industry gets bigger and bigger, our military industrial complex, as Dwight Eisenhower will call it. Okay, that's enough for today. I think I went a little bit long today. Apologize for that. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, smash the like button, comment in the comment section if you like, or share, and that'll help grow my channel a little bit. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.